All right, so I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, so I'm going to kick us off. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the FY 2024 CoC NOFO Bidders Conference for Renewal Applicants. My name is Ari Gregory. I'm the Grants Manager with ECHO, and I will be hosting today's presentation. I'm joined today by my colleague, ECHO's Capacity Building Manager, Bill Wallace, who will be kind of assisting us today with any technical issues that may arise, help us monitor the chat, things like that. I'm also pleased to introduce to y'all my co-presenter today, Mr. Howard Birchman. He's our newly hired CoC NOFO consultant and principal with Housing Innovations. And for those of you who may not be familiar, Housing Innovations is a prominent consulting firm specializing in HUD CoC funding and system improvements for homelessness assistance. With extensive national and international experience, Housing Innovations offers technical guidance and training to enhance CoC's effectiveness and to secure funding. Key figures at Housing Innovations include principals Suzanne Wagner and Mr. Howard Birchman, who's here with us today, alongside a team of senior associates and consultants. Housing Innovations has a successful track record with CoC applications, having supported numerous CoCs, including the state of Connecticut and Nebraska. As y'all know, ECHO is currently in the process of trying to hire for the Homelessness Response System Director of Planning role, which typically oversees the NOFO process. So we are particularly excited to have Howard's expertise this year, and we very much look forward to collaborating closely with him as we approach the submission deadline for collaborative application on October 30th. So there's a few housekeeping items I did want to address before we begin. So as you may have noticed, this meeting is being recorded live and will be posted along with today's slide deck on ECHO's website within the next few business days. I think this will be helpful if you need to hop off a little bit early or if any of your colleagues could not attend today for whatever reason. Secondly, I hope that we have set aside enough time at the end for a Q&A session, but please don't hesitate to ask any questions at any time during our presentation by either typing them into the chat, or you can raise your hand to unmute yourself and we can promote you as a speaker. And then lastly, today's session will, it's kind of meant to provide a high-level overview of the NOFO itself as it relates to our local competition process. If you are new to this process or kind of interested in learning more about the renewal process, you're definitely more than welcome to stay. But again, for new applicants or for those, needing a refresher on CoC funding basics, please note that we do have a separate bidders conference scheduled this Wednesday from 1 to 2:30 in the afternoon. And so that will offer a more detailed introduction to CoC funding. All right, so I'm going to go over today's agenda real quick. So we're going to start by discussing HUD's current priorities and key program highlights related to homelessness, including any strategic shifts or focus areas that impact CoC applications and funding. Next, we'll review the significant changes between the FY24 and FY25 NOFO and the FY23 NOFO. We hope that this will help you understand new requirements, updates, and adjustments in the application process. We'll then provide estimates for our annual renewal demand, the ARD, and bonus amounts for this funding cycle. This will hopefully give you an idea of the available resources and potential funding levels. Following that, we will be outlining the timeline for the local competition process, and we will explain the ranking process. This will include key deadlines and how projects will be evaluated and prioritized. We will also summarize changes from the FY23 local NOFO policies. Understanding these updates, especially for y'all, is crucial for ensuring compliance and ensuring that we are aligned with the new requirements by HUD. After that, we will review the types of projects and components that are eligible for funding under this current NOFO. This will include criteria and any new or revised eligibility requirements. Towards the end, we will cover the appeals policies and processes, both at the local level and with HUD. And this section will kind of detail how to address any concerns or disputes that may arise during the application process. And then finally, like I mentioned in the beginning, we will open the floor for questions and answers at the end. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions or seek clarification on any of the topics that we are discussing today. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Howard just for a second to present the next 2 slides.
Okay, thank you very much, Ari. So basically, the HUD homeless priorities and program highlights, these really have not changed from last year. Remember, HUD still remains committed to using housing first. Obviously, we do want to address the needs of all people who are experiencing homelessness. Obviously, there's been a huge departmental focus on addressing the needs of people who are living unsheltered. The system's performance measures, we know them. They're a huge factor in whether on the scoring for the CoC application, and so they are continuing their emphasis on this. As you know, in the past years, HUD has really awarded a lot of points and emphasized the notion of partnering with housing and health and service agencies. This has to do with leveraging. So HUD is emphasizing the fact that we want to leverage additional housing support for these projects, or we're going to show that we're leveraging healthcare or supportive services resources for these projects. Continuing strong emphasis on enhancing racial equity and improving support to LGBTQ+ individuals. Of course, engaging people with lived experience in policy and program development and monitoring the operations of CoC programs. And this next one is a new one. It's talking about building an effective workforce, and it really is talking about the people who work for your organizations who are providing direct services to people who are experiencing homelessness, making sure that they have compensation that is really commensurate with the really challenges of that job, providing some opportunities for them to get career advancement as well and professional advancement. HUD this year, for the first time ever, is going to provide additional funding for renewal projects, so that those projects who have funding on the budget line items for supportive services and homeless management information systems, those grants will receive an automatic cost. All of those renewal grants will receive an automatic cost of living adjustment as part of this competition. That's part of HUD's exercise to try and ensure that we have an effective workforce. And obviously, in order to end homelessness and have housing for all people, we have to increase the supply of affordable housing in the community. Next slide, please. Okay, just some quick summary of some of the big changes that are in this competition that separates it from the prior ones this year. And this is a big change for our CoC. YHDP, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project this year, every one of them, doesn't matter what round you were funded in, every YHDP project will be funded non-competitively this year. If you're renewing a YHDP project, it's essentially, as long as you submit an application and you apply for the full amount of funding, you're virtually guaranteed to get that funding. You also have the option of doing a YHDP replacement project, which basically will also serve the same eligible YHDP population, but it will allow you to either dramatically change your budget or actually use a whole new program component. Another big change is the amount of risk in this competition is much greater. This year, the size of Tier 1 is that portion of our renewal grants that were guaranteed funding. This year, only 90% of our renewal funding is guaranteed. Last year, it was 93%. The year before that, it was 95%. So you can see increasingly there are more funds that are at risk. On the other side of that coin is the fact that the potential amounts that we can ask for budget for bonuses, either for the regular CoC, the non-domestic violence funds, or for the domestic violence bonus, have both significantly increased this year. So there's greater risk, but there's also greater opportunity into them in terms of those two funding lines as well. This year, HUD is making it abundantly clear that projects that have previously been funded either under the DV bonus or under the YHTP, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, must continue to serve those same populations. You cannot reallocate that funding away from either DV or Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program purposes. I've already indicated that there's going to be this automatic increase to the budget lines under supported services and HMIS. And then finally, probably the biggest thing this year is it's a 2-year competition. That means that if you are submitting either a renewal or a new project application that will be submitted this year and will expire a year further into the future, expire in 2026. If you submit a 1-year renewal or new project application that will expire in 2026, HUD advises us that they will automatically renew those applications next year in 2025, and you will not have to participate in the competitive process. The only things that will have to submit applications next year are going to be any renewal grants that are expiring in 2026 that did not submit a renewal application as part of this competition. And there is the potential, it's just the potential because we do not have a HUD budget for fiscal year 25, but when the HUD budget passes, there is the potential that there'll be some additional funding for either DV or regular bonuses. If that funding exists, or if they're reallocated funds, then there will also be a competition for new projects next year in 25. But basically in 2025, we'll only be renewing grants that are expiring for the first time in 26, or we're going to have a smaller competition just for new or reallocated funds. Next slide.
All right, thank you so much for that high-level review, Howard. So I'm gonna take things back and I'm gonna talk a little bit about the anticipated application amounts based on the latest ARD, the R report that was released just last week. And so our estimated R this year, which does include the restricted YHTP grants and DV bonus funded grants that Howard just mentioned, is at $11,390,709. ECHO will be applying for a CoC planning grant of $569,535, which, as you all know, supports our CoC planning activities. This amount also represents a slight increase from last year. And as y'all know, it is included from the tiered funding process, meaning it'll essentially be automatically funded by HUD. And as I noted in a recent community NOFO update email, we do not expect to have reallocation funds available for new projects this year. And this is because none of the renewal projects have met the criteria for involuntary reallocation per local policy, nor have they expressed an intent to voluntarily reallocate funds. The only exception to this, however, is we do have one renewal applicant who's already submitted their transition grant request prior to the GIW, the grant inventory worksheet due date. They have received prior approval from Leadership Council to submit a transition grant application. So the amount that you're seeing here on this slide is specifically reserved for that transition grant applicant, just so y'all know. And this year, we are pretty excited to see a notable increase in bonus funding that Howard just kind of explained to us. So just for comparison, last year we had approximately $750,000 in CoC bonus funds. And a little bit over $810,000 in DV bonus funds. So the current figures obviously show a significant boost. And as Howard mentioned, also tier 1 amount this year is set at 90% of the ARD compared to 93% last year, minus the sum of non-competitive YHTP grants that are excluded from the tiered funding process. And finally, The tier 2 amount that was calculated based on the math formula provided in NOFO is at $3,753,575. And please feel free to review the math if you're interested. So local competition timeline overview. So the local competition timeline was officially published on our website on, I believe, August 14th. We officially opened the competition last Wednesday. And as you may have noticed, all the application materials, including the local policies and scoring guides, etc., they are available on our local competition webpage. And like last year, this year's application forms are embedded directly on our website. We also offer downloadable Word doc versions of these applications for your convenience. So we strongly recommend that you start first with the Word doc to kind of draft your application first, and then transferring those contents into the web form once they're finalized. And please note that the web form, unfortunately, it can't be saved incrementally as you go. And so please make a note of that. A new feature that we did add this year, however, that will allow you to view your submission, including the attachments, after you hit the submit button. And so I think we would recommend that you save that page as confirmation for your records. But for whatever reason, if you're not seeing that page, that confirmation page, please let us know, and we'll be happy to forward you the submitted contents for your records. And speaking of submission, just to kind of avoid last minute technical issues, we do suggest that you try to submit your application maybe at least a day before the final submission deadline, which is Friday, September 20th, no later than 6 p.m. And again, if you do encounter any technical difficulties with a web form, anything else, please email us immediately at nofo@austinecho.org so that we can kind of help troubleshoot. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we will be hosting another bidders conference this Wednesday from 1 to 2:30 p.m., which is aimed primarily at new applicants. And then similar to last year, we will also host a drop-in NOFO office hours through Zoom. And that will be on Thursday, September 5th and September 12th. And that will be in the morning from 9 to 10 a.m. And this will be an opportunity for y'all to attend and do like a live Q&A with myself and Howard. And again, with the submission, all application materials, including the required attachments in your eSnaps applications, they are due by 6 p.m. on Friday, September 20th. After submission, just so y'all are aware, so a team of ECHO staff will be reviewing all the applications that are submitted mainly to ensure that they meet HUD's project eligibility and project quality thresholds. So we call that threshold review. And then at that point, applications with curable deficiencies will be returned by that following Monday, September 23rd, for resubmissions. Now, rejections for incurable deficiencies will also be communicated at that time with reasonings provided. And so if you do not hear from us ECHO staff on that day, just know that your application, it just means that your application has passed the threshold review process, and they will be forwarded to the independent review team, IRT, for scoring. So please know that. And then corrections for curable deficiencies, they must be returned to us ECHO by 6 p.m. on Wednesday, September 25th. And so once all the project applications pass the threshold review conducted by ECHO staff, again, they will be forwarded to IRT for scoring. And the scoring process by IRT will be completed by Wednesday, October 9th. So after that, ECHO staff will be preparing a multiple draft options to present to Leadership Council for the priority listing. And so at that time, they will all be reviewed, discussed, and then approved, selected and approved by the Leadership Council on Friday, October 11th. And as required by HUD, the adopted draft priority listing, they will be announced to the broader community and to you all individually through email. And they will also be posted on our webpage on Friday, October 11th. And this is to ensure compliance with HUD's NOFO requirements as well. And then after that, any projects that wish to appeal Leadership Council's ranking decision, they must do so by Thursday, October 17th, following the local appeals procedure that I'm going to cover later in today's presentation. Appeals will be reviewed and decided upon by Leadership Council on Tuesday, October 22nd. And then finally, ECHO will be submitting the finalized collaborative application packet, which includes the adopted finalized priority listing, all the eSNAPS project applications, and the CoC application to HUD, and we'll do that through eSNAPS no later than Wednesday, October 30th. So this slide is basically the written version of what I just went over. I added as a reference, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to review basically the key changes to the local NOFO, the 3 NOFO policies that have been discussed, reviewed, and approved by Leadership Council for the FY24, FY25 CoC NOFO. These updates ensure that our local policies align with the NOFO requirements. So I'm going to start with the FY24 review, scoring, and ranking policy. So the first section has to do with shortened time frame. So the time provided to applicants with curable deficiencies, unfortunately, has been reduced from previously 5 business days, and so that we can address the tight local competition deadlines imposed by HUD. And so this adjustment basically reflects the impracticality of the previous timeline and also aims to balance applicant needs with the deadlines. The second part has to do with non-competitive renewal for YHDP projects, as we've been talking about. So the policy now explicitly ensures that all youth homelessness demonstration programs or YHDP projects are non-competitively renewed. And obviously this aligns with the with NOFO's guidance and maintains consistency in our review process. So the third revision has to do with the HMIS scorecard issues that you are already well aware of. So due to the technical issues we've been having with our HMIS vendor, WellSky, specifically their inability to pull scorecards, Leadership Council, sort of as a compromise, has decided to use data from Q1 through Q4 of 2023 based on the old scorecard metrics for assessing renewal projects performance this year. And so again, this is a compromise, and just, you know, kind of ensures that we can still fairly evaluate performance amidst the technical challenges that we're facing. And then the fourth adjustments we made has to do with ranking of first-time renewals, which we have a couple projects that are renewing for the first time this year. So this new policy change now ensures that first-time renewal projects are ranked non-competitively above all competitively ranked projects. So essentially, this means that these projects, these first-time renewal projects, will be positioned at the top of tier 1 to kind of reflect their priority. And so, continuing with the ranking section of the policy, the revision here at the top, it kind of has to do with a scorecard look back period in light of the WellSky technical issue I just mentioned. So, as in previous years, renewal projects that do not meet that 65% threshold on the old scorecard, they will be ranked competitively with new projects. So that part remains the same. So Leadership Council has introduced a new ranking policy for transition grants projects. And that is a change from previous years. And here's kind of how it works. So transition grants whose renewal projects being voluntarily reallocated and that meet the 65% threshold, they will be ranked above all new projects versus transition grants that do not meet that 65% threshold. They will be ranked competitively with all other new projects. And as you all know, transition grants are considered technically new projects by HUD, and so they will be scored entirely based on their new application. But having this kind of policy ensures that transition grants meeting that 65% threshold are prioritized, while transition grants scoring below that 65% threshold will not receive this prioritization. And then lastly, the last part has to do with the basically removing appeals for incurable deficiency. So this section of the policy now specifies that project applicants with incurable deficiencies cannot submit an appeal. And this change reflects HUD's stance that such deficiencies are not addressable and should be rejected immediately. Oh, and before I proceed, I see a question in the chat by Kaylee. What makes someone eligible for a transition grant? That's a great question. Howard, can I get your help with this?
Well, I mean, again, it would really be with the CoC. I mean, any organization, if they have an existing CoC grant and there is a reason why they cannot continue that grant, either they are having difficulty finding sufficient eligible people to serve under the terms of that grant, whether rapid rehousing is not sufficient approach, you need a permanent supportive housing. Any of those reasons could be reasons why you want a transition grant. Will allow you to change your program component to another program component. So if you're dealing with a grant that is not really adequately addressing the needs of your participants, I think it's something that should be discussed with the CoC, but under those circumstances, you could be able to seek to transition it to another program component, but it would be a dramatic change in what your project is seeking to accomplish.
Yeah, and I will add to Kaylee that I, in the next slide or two, we'll be explaining like the local procedure we put in place, essentially requesting that any renewal applicant requesting a transition grant process will need to kind of explain that, like the reasoning behind that project component type change with specific attention to how that will affect currently enrolled program participants. Just to be in line with HUD's requirements that transition grants, because they represent like a significant shift, that requires CoC consent, which locally we interpreted that to mean consent by Leadership Council. And so I'm just reading your question. So it is within the, yes, it is within the same agency. Yeah, it's not like transferring the, so it's essentially like a renewal applicant voluntarily saying, hey, we want to reallocate our funding to, and so the funding amount remains the same and the recipient remains the same. Like it won't be transferred to a different.
Yep. A transition application is basically a reallocation application that stays with the same organization that had the funds to begin with. So we don't change. It's not a change of recipient. A reallocation would be a brand new recipient and a potential change of program component as well.
All right. Hopefully it looks like we addressed your question. So thank you for bringing that up, and appreciate Howard chiming in. I'm going to proceed to the next slide. Okay. So moving on to the reallocation deobligation policy. So the first section has to do with removal of the HMIS expansion reallocation procedure that we instituted last year. So basically we removed that requirement because this procedure is not considered necessary for this year. And so the second section has to do with what we just discussed with the transition grant process. So again, renewal applicants who are wishing to change their project component type, now per this section of the policy, they must submit a transition grant request letter to Leadership Council. And again, this letter needs to outline basically the rationale for that reallocation. And they also have to describe how that will impact current enrolled clients. And so this requirement was communicated through email to all renewal applicants when the GIW was due. So there's that. And then we also clarified the policy regarding first-time renewals. So this is to ensure alignment with HUD stipulations. So Leadership Council has added specific language to our policy just to kind of make it clear that first-time renewals cannot be reallocated. And so this addition will ensure that all renewal applicants are fully informed about this restriction. So this is the last slide for the changes for the local policy, and this is for the community funding priorities for new projects. So permanent supportive housing PSH will remain the priority for this year's NOFO, similar to last year, but the scope has been expanded. So in addition to site-based projects, PSH projects, submissions for scatter site PSH project are also welcome this year. And it's not on this slide, but I did want to add basically two disclaimers here that were suggested by Howard just a couple days ago. So the first one has to do with essentially only requesting non-capital costs for PSH projects. And so to you all, I'm hoping that it's pretty clear given HUD's funding amounts that they tell us. I did want to acknowledge that this policy document, it does not explicitly state that PSH project applications should only request non-capital costs, for instance, supported services funding. And so essentially the funding amounts, as you all know, they are usually insufficient for any project applicants to request capital costs. Just know that we are now considering adding this clarification for the next time around. We just did not catch that before we published it. So I do want to apologize. And then the second sort of disclaimer has to do with how we are prioritizing new project applications. And so as stated in this policy document, PSH projects will, in general, they will be prioritized. But please know that this does not preclude the submission of new project applications for other component types. So this means that Leadership Council will prioritize PSH wherever feasible, but they may also consider other project types, especially if they enhance the competitiveness of our collaborative application. And so just as an example, we know that DV bonus projects, they can't apply for PSH, but they can only apply for SSOCE, rapid, or joint transitional to rapid. And so just know that these kinds of constraints, they will be factored into the decision-making process by Leadership Council when they are trying to pick the priority listing option to submit to HUD. So this was screenshotted directly from the GIW, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but this was added just for your reference. This is confirmation that here's the list of all the eligible renewal projects for this year's NOFO process. And so with that, I'm going to now turn things back over to Howard, who will now be kind of walking us through the eligible project component types, including participant eligibility requirements.
Okay, so the eligible components for renewal projects. First of all, the important thing, remember, the grant inventory worksheet that is published by HUD is where you find your specific annual renewal demand information. Your goal is to apply for all of the dollars that is shown on the grant inventory worksheet under the total for your annual renewal demand. You are allowed to, as part of the renewal process, to make what are called non-significant changes. You cannot change the bottom line. The total amount shown on the grant inventory worksheet should be the total amount that you apply for, but you can make minor changes. If your total grant is, you can move up to 10% of the total grant funds to other budget lines. It means you can even open up a budget line that you might not have in your existing budget, but you can move no more than 10% of the total funds in the grant. That's considered to be a minor change. So the projects that you are allowed to renew in this competition are going to be the permanent supportive housing projects, your permanent housing rapid rehousing projects. If you have an existing transitional housing project, transitional housing is not eligible for a new project application, but existing transitional housing projects can be renewed. If you have one of the relatively new components of the joint transitional rapid rehousing things, that is eligible as both a renewal or a new project type. The only supportive services only projects that HUD currently supports are going to be those that support the coordinated entry system. Those are the so-called supportive services only coordinated entry projects. If you have a dedicated HMIS project, which means you must be the HMIS lead, obviously that is eligible for renewal. If you are YHDP projects, you can renew as transitional or crisis residential transitional housing projects. Supportive services only, remember this is YHDP only. Supportive services only host home and kinship care projects, and also specialty HMIS projects serving the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program populations. Next slide, please. Again, you need to continue serving those eligible populations that your original project proposed to be serving. So you really want to pay attention to what your original application. HUD for a very long period of time has restricted new permanent supportive housing projects to serving only either the chronically homeless project or the slightly larger population called the dedicated plus eligibility project. In the rapid rehousing or the joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, or supportive services only project, you can serve folks who meet the homeless definition under categories 1, 2, or 4 of the homeless definition. Those are people who are literally homeless, people who will be imminently homeless, or people who are fleeing or survivors of domestic abuse or violence. YHD projects will always be restricted to serving a youth population. Those are people who are 24 or younger. Once they turn 25, they're no longer eligible for YHDP services. There's a slightly broader eligibility for the youth that we're serving. They either qualify meeting the homeless definition under those paragraphs as noted here, 1, 2, or 4, or if you're serving a youth in a YHDP project, if that youth has an unsafe primary nighttime residence and has no safe alternative to that residence for the YHDP program, they're considered homeless, and you can serve them using YHDP funds. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned before, one of the things that you can do, if you are a YHDP project, that you can do a so-called YHDP replacement project. That is essentially a reallocation. It maintains the same recipient, sort of a transition project. It would maintain the same recipient, but it would change the program component to better address the needs of youth experiencing homelessness in the community. Anytime you do a YHDP replacement project, you've got to demonstrate that that project is consistent with the consolidated community plan that you developed as part of the YHDP process, number one. And number two, you've got to demonstrate that that replacement project is approved by the Youth Action Board. So you must make sure that you are serving those eligible populations and you've got approval before you can switch to a YHDP replacement project by the Youth Action Board, get that advance approval. A consolidation project is a renewal project other than this is not using YHDP funds. A consolidated project is going to use CoC funds. It is going to be where you've got a renewal project where you've got the same recipient. It's got to be the same organization receiving these funds, and they have to have the same program component, which is either going to be permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, the joint TH rapid rehousing component. So if you've got an organization that has more than one grant under that same component, then you are allowed to consolidate those two grants into a single grant. Generally speaking, this is beneficial to everybody. It reduces your workload. You only have to do one annual performance report. You've got a larger pool of money that you can work with, so it enables you to have greater flexibility and fully spending down those funds. So there's some real advantages to it. The only thing that you need to be careful about is that when you consolidate projects, the start date for the consolidated project will be the earliest start date of the projects that you are consolidating. One of the things that we do know from experience is that HUD is not very good at getting grants executed at the start of a calendar year. So we would advise folks who've got the same grants, same recipient, same grants under the same component to seriously consider consolidation unless you have a start date on one of those grants that you can consolidate. That's like in the first quarter or the first 4 months of the program year. If that is the case, you probably don't want to consolidate those grants together because it's going to put a big burden on your organization. If HUD is not able to execute your contract in a timely manner, you're basically going to have to borrow funds to be able to continue serving your participants. HUD is not going to pay you the cost that you experience in having to borrow those funds. So you're going to potentially experience distress in trying to serve this highly vulnerable population that you certainly want to serve. So consolidation is a great approach. Be very careful in using that if you're going to consolidate grants that's going to push them towards the start of the calendar year. Next slide, please. An expansion project is basically a new project application. It is basically taking an existing project and expanding that project. You basically do submit that as shown here. You have to submit the initial renewal application as well as submitting a new project application. Both the renewal and the new project applications have to specify the project that they are expanding. Remember, in order to expand a project, you have to add units. You have to add additional services to folks that are currently receiving those, or you can do both. But you've got to do something in addition to what you're doing already. Both the new project application and the renewal project application will both have to be funded by HUD. If that is the case, then HUD will you will be awarded an expanded contract, which will be the combined amounts of the existing renewal and the new project that you applied for. You can ask for capital funding in the expansion project. And YHDP can potentially use the expansion project, but in order to do that, we would have to have an existing YHDP grant that is deliberately choosing not to renew. I do not believe we have that in this competition. So although it's theoretically eligible for a YHDP project to expand, the only circumstances where that could happen is where an existing YHDP is going to give its funding, then those funds could be available for an expansion. So we'll look at this as a future possibility, not a possibility in this competition. Here we go. I specified some of these, but in order to do an expansion, you've got to serve new program participants, which means you're going to have additional units of services. You can provide greater number of services. We had historically, those of you who've been around for a while know that many years ago, HUD awarded a grant, a series of permanent housing grants under the Shelter Plus, what used to be the Shelter Plus Care program, that basically did not provide any supportive services from HUD. So therefore, a lot of those older projects do indeed have a need to provide some supportive services. Sometimes those projects are expanding. If you happen, and this is rarely happens, if you have a existing facility that is not meeting health and safety standards, that really shouldn't be the case, but if you have that thing, you can apply for some expansion funding to help you meet those health and safety things. Also, there are some rare cases where you are supporting services from a source of funding that was non-renewable. You could potentially seek to replace those through this expansion grant. And also you can, if you've got a supportive services coordinated entry grant, you can apply through the expansion grant to either enhance your your coordinated entry processes, either to serve harder to serve populations, enhance things in which your navigation, or enhance services to get units committed to the project. Or the HMIS lead can also apply to expand their HMIS project by providing more reports, improving the utility of the HMIS system for all participants. That's okay. And a transition project, we've had some discussion about the transition projects already. We know what it is already. You have to be the existing grantee. You should go to the Leadership Council to get their approval on a transition project, because if you get that approval, it'll allow your project to be prioritized over other new project. As you can see, if you're doing a transition grant, you're restricted to applying for only a 1-year term. A lot of times in a new project application, you could request a longer than a 1-year term, not the case for either a transition or an expansion project. And then you complete the transition from one program component to the other during the course of the program year. And then when the next competition comes up, you will be renewed under that new component that you have shifted to. And as I mentioned, a YHDP replacement is basically an existing YHDP grant, the same YHDP recipient, but who's making a choice to change the component of that grant or to make a very significant change in the budget. YHDP renewals can make those non-significant changes in a YHDP renewal project. You can shift up to 10% of the funds in the contract to another program line or around in the budget. In a YHDP replacement project, you could be making a much greater budget change. You want to shift more than 10% of the funds, or you want to entirely shift components from one component to another, shift from rapid rehousing, say, to permanent supportive housing. You would do that as a replacement project. Again, since this is YHDP, this is non-competitive. So as long as you submit an application by your organization, existing YHDP grantee, asking for the total amount of YHDP funding as shown on the grant inventory worksheet, HUD is going to fund that project, even if you've made some potential errors in submitting your replacement project application. Don't be concerned. Your biggest thing as a YHDP grantee is just to make sure that you, the applicant organization, submits a renewal application and that you apply for all the YHDP funding as is shown in the grant inventory worksheet. HUD is always upfront in saying that if you apply for less funds than you are entitled to apply for, HUD cannot adjust that amount. They can't give you more than what you asked for. So you have to be careful to make sure that you ask for the right amount of funding, or else you will lose funding. Next slide, please. And a reallocation project, you cannot basically, you can reallocate a YHDP project, but it means that the existing grantee has got to stop the grant, no longer is going to participate in the YHDP project. Those essentially become new project funds, and basically we can solicit from an eligible organization the application to provide a new YHDP activity. Again, in this competition, we do not have any of our YHDP recipients that are relinquishing their funding, that are not continuing their project. So in this competition, although reallocation YHDP exists as a theoretic possibility, we will not be employing that. And again, I said it, you can, if you've got If you're an existing YHTP grantee and you've got more than one grant in the same program component, there are slightly more program components for YHTP, but it's rapid rehousing, it's the joint component, it's one of the supportive services only components. In those cases, if you've got more than one project under those components, you can use the YHTP replacement project to consolidate. For YHTP, you can only consolidate 4 grants, but it's highly unusual that any grantee would have 4 YHTP grants in the same program component. I've never seen that happen. So that's not really a limiting factor. You also have the potential to expand a YHTP grant, but again, in order to do that, we'd have to have some existing YHTP funding that would be available for that reallocation. So, and we again, existing YHTP grantees are renewing their grants. So again, although the expansion is a theoretic possibility, we would need someone to relinquish YHTP funding for someone else to come in and submit that that expansion request. So, next slide. Oh, and now I switch it back.
Yes, thank you so much, Howard. Okay, so I'm going to take things back. And so, as I mentioned earlier, sort of when I went over the local competition timeline, the local appeals process that will be made available once the draft priority listing is approved by Leadership Council and released on Friday, October 11th. And so, at that time, all applicants will be notified of their ranking or status. And the types of eligible appeals, they do remain the same as last year with one key exception, which is that, like I mentioned earlier, projects with incurable deficiencies are no longer considered eligible to submit an appeal during their local process. And the eligible appeal scenarios include the following 3 types that you're seeing here on this slide. And so just to kind of go over the timeline a little bit, again, the appeals process will begin immediately after the draft priority listing is communicated publicly and notified all applicants on a Friday, October 11th. And applicants will have until, I believe, Thursday, October 17th at by 6 p.m. to submit their appeals. And then Leadership Council will review those appeals and they will make a decision on all the submitted appeals by Tuesday, October 22nd. And so on that same day, applicants will receive notification of Leadership Council's decision along with the reasoning. And so the process itself for the appeals locally remains exactly the same as last year, but just as a recap, the appeals must be submitted in writing on the applicant agency's letterhead. And this letter should clearly outline the facts, evidence, and specific issues that are being contested. This clarity is essential for Leadership Council to make a well-informed decision. And again, Leadership Council will communicate their decision in writing to the appealing applicant before the collaborative application submission deadline. And so we do plan on providing this notification well in advance. And to help prepare your appeal letter, you are allowed to request a summary of the scoring information from ECHO prior to submitting your appeal. But as noted on this slide, please know that individual IRT member scores will not be released. Now, beyond the local appeals process with Leadership Council, applicants will have the option to further appeal Leadership Council's decision directly to HUD if that is desired. And so applicants will have 2 options for doing that. So one is the solo applicant appeal process. So this is a process where if an applicant believes that they were denied a reasonable opportunity to participate in a local competition process, they may appeal that directly to HUD as a so-called solo applicant. And so this kind of process allows the applicant to submit their application directly to HUD for consideration. And then the second process, so eligible applicants who were denied funds or received less funding than what they had requested, they may also appeal that directly to HUD. And for detailed information on these processes, please refer to pages 120 and 126 of the NOFO. And here's a page with the direct link to the eSNAPS navigational guide for the appeals process, specifically as a solo applicant. All right, so that's basically it from myself and Howard. As y'all know, there are a whole lot more resources out there for y'all to review. And I think I mentioned this in the email before, but the FY24 eSNAPS navigational guides, I don't think they're posted as of today, last I checked. But all the detailed instructions, they are posted, I believe, on HUD's CoC competition webpage that you see here at the top. And so we would, as per usual, we do strongly encourage y'all to review them thoroughly as you're completing the eSNAPS application, because they do contain really, really helpful hints and tips on how you can, actually frame your narrative responses. And then here are links to resources that are specific to our CoC. So we are towards the end, and I think I'm seeing some questions in the chat, so we can open the floor up for questions. For the match letter, we just need to, yes. And Howard already got that covered. Thank you, Howard. Hopefully that answers your question, Kaylee. So we have 30 minutes for Q&A. Yes, he did say yes, correct. So you can either type your questions in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute, you can raise your hand and we can promote you as a speaker. But no pressure to do so. Oh. Kaylee, I think you can talk now.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know that there was a mention of the cost of living increase. Is that going to be something HUD does after the like the scoring process, or is there a percentage? I'm just trying to think ahead of how we would need to ensure we have the appropriate in-kind match to match our new grant amount.
Good. That's a good question. So HUD, HUD is going to use some sort of a
Algorithm.
they always do. They've got formulas, so they're going to use an inflation factor that they'll apply to your grant. We don't know what your total is going to be at this point in time, so you're right. It is likely that you'll end up being awarded more than what you applied for. So if your match letter is just specifically for what you applied for, you'll probably have to update your match letter when it comes to the technical submission phase, because your grant would have been a little larger than what you applied for.
And when we do our application, do we know if HUD's going to apply that escalator just to like the support service BLI, or will it be to the entire grant amount?
Nope. It's going to be both the supportive services, and if you have a separate HMIS budget line, some grants do, it'll be applied just to those two lines.
Okay, support and HMIS. Got it.
Meanwhile, of course, if you're getting rental assistance or leasing, that will, and your permanent housing, those budget lines will increase too, as you know. You've had experience with that in the past. Yep.
Okay. All right. That is helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna give folks maybe a minute or two. If you would like to ask more questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. just as a friendly reminder, Howard and myself will also be hosting just like a drop-in office hour. We won't have a presentation or anything, but we will be live online through Zoom. The link to that Zoom will be, I think they're posted already on our webpage, so you can just, pop in to that Zoom link if you like for live Q&A. You can also reach us through the NOFO inbox. I am, myself and my team here at ECHO are monitoring that inbox daily for any TA technical issues. We won't be able to, obviously answer any questions that may give you like a competitive advantage, like related to program design or anything like that. But we're there to kind of help clarify any questions you may have. And so, yeah, please feel free to reach out to us that email as well. And Mark, I see your comment in the chat. You're welcome, and give folks a little bit more time. And if there are no questions, I will end this webinar a little early. Okay, I see folks are starting to hop off, so I think we can just end it right here. Thank you all so much for attending, and we wish you the best of luck.